Jesus, draw me ever nearer as I labor through the storm. Blessing and honor, glory and power, be to the ancient of days. All every nation, all of creation, bow for the ancient of days.
realized there was some bad news. Winter is here, and it is cold outside. I don't know about you, but I really got used to the 50 and 60 degree weather that we were having in December. And I even told other people that I would be perfectly fine if God decided to keep it that way for the rest of winter. I don't know how many of you would agree with me on that, but I would appreciate that. But at last, that's not what happened. Winter has come upon us. I want to ask you this. How many of you, don't have to raise your hand because you don't, but how many of you has made a resolution, New Year's resolution? I don't know what it is, but how many of you have made one? If you've made one, maybe it's something fairly common. Many of us make New Year's resolutions to lose weight, to read more, to exercise more, to spend more time with family, to spend more time with friends. And the list goes on and on of the typical things, the typical reasons why for New Year's resolutions. And I don't know how many of you have made something around that same area as far as your New Year's resolution. But I couldn't resist. I wanted to look up if there were any strange New Year's resolutions. So I typed it in, looked online, as far as people who have made these New Year's resolutions. So I picked the 6 strangest New Year's resolutions. The first New Year's resolution that I found was someone decided they would like to knit more sweaters. Now that and that alone is probably okay, but wait till you hear their reason. They knit more sweaters for freezing trees. I don't know about you, but we've all seen the commercials of these poor animals that are being mistreated. I've never seen one where a tree is being mistreated. But they have decided to knit more sweaters for the freezing trees. Bless the trees' hearts. What about taking up extreme ironing? You ever heard of this? Extreme ironing? If you've never heard of it, what extreme ironing is when you take an iron and an ironing board and you iron your clothes while on a highway. So I don't know about how many of you will take up extreme ironing. I would strongly suggest not to do that. Another one that I came across was to collect as many as they could the air sick bags from every major airline. So if you're planning a few trips, collect the air sick bags. The fourth one I came across was if you're ever at a 4-way stop, you wave to the fellow motorist. So you're at a 4-way stop and you see everybody, make sure you wave before turning or going straight. The fifth one, and personally the one that I had to take a step back on, to kiss more parked cars. So when you leave church today, if you see someone out in the parking lot kissing parked cars, please do what you should do and call the police, because there's something wrong with that person. And the last one is to stop buying cucumbers. I don't know what it is about cucumbers or why that's a movement, but stop buying cucumbers. New Year's is the perfect time of year to reevaluate, to reflect, and to hope for something greater. I was talking to a family member this week, and he went on and on about he didn't understand why people get so excited about New Year and the New Year. His point being is New Year's Day is just like any other day. And in 2016, guess what? You still have to pay bills. In 2016, you're still going to have good days. You're still going to have bad days. You're still going to have to show up to work in the morning. You're still going to have to do this or that. It's the same as any other year. So why do we get so excited about the new year? Well, what I would like to bring up is the reason why people get so excited about the new year is because it's an opportunity, it's a chance for something to improve upon. We call that hope. And hope is something you cannot put a dollar figure on. Hope is not something that just shows up. Hope is something that we all have, we all want, and we hope for a better tomorrow. We hope for improvement in our life in one area or another. replace hope. And it is today, as we kick off the year with our Fresh Start Sunday, that I would like to share with you something to put your hope in, something to invest in. As we start this new year, it's a time for a fresh outlook, a reminder of what really is important in the life in which we live in. I want to start with the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. Now, before we get into the parable, we're going to read it here in just a moment. I want to make sure to point something out, that for the rich man and Lazarus, the Roman Empire and the Egyptian Empire, this is a history lesson, so if you don't like history, forgive me, we'll move on. But the Roman and Egyptian empires were very similar, and they were very different than ours. And the fact that both in the Roman and the Egyptian Empire, there were an upper class, and this is the wealthy, and the poor class, the poverty class. There was no middle class. In our country, the largest class is the middle class. And most of us fit into that. Now, but in Rome, you had the rich and the poor. And there was no middle ground. 2/3 of the Roman population were slaves, so they had no income. With that being said, that's the picture that you have to have. And that's why this parable goes from one extreme to the next, because that was the world in which they lived in. So Jesus tells this parable. And this parable is very unique because it actually names somebody. None of Christ's other parables had a specific name, but this one did. And it starts with Lazarus and the rich man. Luke 16, 19 through 23 says this. There was a rich man who would dress in purple and fine linen, feasting lavishly every day. But a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, was left at the gate. He longed to be filled with what fell from the rich man's table. But instead the dogs would come and lick his sores. One day the poor man died and was carried away by the angels to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. And being in torment in Hades, he looked up and saw Abraham a long way off with Lazarus at his side. The parable of the rich man and Lazarus starts with Lazarus. This is not to be confused with Jesus' friend, in which he raised from the dead. This was a diseased poor person. And then there's a rich man who would be condemned. Now this rich man was not condemned because he was wealthy. He's not condemned because he's a good financier and was able to accumulate wealth. That's not why he was condemned. He was being condemned because he didn't accept God and God's purpose for his life. He wanted success. He wanted money in which this life could provide for him. He wasn't concerned for what he could do for God and God's kingdom. He wanted only what he could do for himself. And we find him suffering. And in his torment, in his suffering, in his pain, he has this realization that it's going to last forever. It's going to last for eternity. He asked for just a drink, just some form of relief, but Abraham was unable to comply. So that's where the rich man was. But where was Lazarus? Lazarus was in heaven. So why would God, a loving God that he is, why would he send anyone to hell? A lot of people ask this question. Now, Jesus was the most loving man who ever lived. Yet he spoke more of hell than anyone else. He experienced it himself on the cross when he was separated from his Father. He knows what hell is like because for a few days he was separated from God. Now there is a reality. The Bible describes hell as a terrible fate, that no sacrifice is too great to avoid it. Jesus says if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off, for it's better for you to go into eternity without a hand than to remain complete and be in hell. The fire never goes out. Hell's eternal. It's inevitable for those who have not accepted Jesus Christ as Lord. But guess what? We can avoid it. if we make the right choice. Nobody goes to hell unless they want to. Now, I don't think anybody sits around and says, yay, I want to go to hell and everlasting torment and pain and suffering. That's not what we're talking about. But they make their choice, and because of their choices, it will lead them to hell. Heaven and hell, essentially, is your choice. Do you want heaven or do you want hell? Christianity, the Bible believes that people have a soul that will live forever. And you can decide which path you want to go on. People go to heaven because they love God and they submit to His authority. People go to hell because they don't want God to be part of their life. As they live here on this world, they like separation from God. They like to be separate from God. They like to be away from God. They don't want God in their business. They don't want God to be a part of their life. They want control. So in the end, that's what happens. God tells them, okay, in this life, you didn't want anything to do with me. So, I'm just going to provide that for you for eternity. You don't want me, I'm not going to force myself upon you. C.S. Lewis says, and he kind of sums it up well, when he says this, there are only two kinds of people in the end. Those who say to God, thy will be done. In other words, we go to God and say, God, have your way with my life. And those who God says in the end, your will be done. Those who God says, okay, you made the choice. Your will be done. Not mine, but yours. Those who decide that they want their will done, all are going to hell because they choose it. Without the self-choice, there is no hell. No soul that can seriously and constantly desires joy will ever miss it. Those who seek will find, and those who knock, it will be open. Again, C.S. Lewis in The Great Divorce. Hell is a destination that people choose to go to. And it has everything to do with attitude. In Luke 6, 24 through 26, we discover the attitude of both rich men and Lazarus. Starting with verse 24, it says this, Father Abraham, he called out, have mercy on me. Send Lazarus to dip the tip of my finger in water and cool my tongue, because I am in agony in this flame. Son, Abraham said, remember that during your life you will receive good things, just as Lazarus received bad things. But now he is comforted here, while you are in agony. Besides all this, a great chasm has been fixed between us and you, so that those who want to be passed over from here to you cannot. Neither can those from the cross over to us. Attitude is why each and every one of each of these men are in the place that they are at. The rich man was wealthy. And the Pharisees, the religious leaders of that day, that's how they justified if somebody was righteous. If you were a good Christian, or in their case, if you were a good Jewish man, it was because you were wealthy. Now we see why that doesn't make sense and should never be the case. But that was their approach. If you are wealthy, that means you've made good choices in your life. Well done. Now we know that that's messed up thinking, but that was their way of thinking. So this man, with his religious leaders telling him there's no holds barred on this, he decides to invest in his wealth. He becomes very, very rich. And in the middle of all his blessings, he has no regard for God. And that amazes me even to this day. How many of you know people who are so sour on life? They have such a poor outlook on life. Yet, if you take a look at their life, they are incredibly blessed. They have so many things to be grateful for. They have so many blessings, yet they can't see it because they have such a poor outlook on life, because their attitude is so bad. All he wanted was money. And what this rich man is guilty of is selfishness and self-centeredness. He's selfish because he liked living high on a hog. He spent most of his life gaining wealth and enjoying the finest luxuries of life. He accumulated great wealth and possessions. But what would any of that mean in the end? To suffer eternal pain and suffering? The judgment was final. He made his own choice. Selfishness gained him a lot on this earth, in this life, but it would gain him nothing for eternity. But then he was also self-centered. He was consumed with himself. He is suffering and reaches out to Abraham. But even in death, he demands that Abraham or anyone else would take care of his needs. In all his pain and suffering, he's still selfish. He's still self-centered. And that attitude was his undoing. On the other side, we have Lazarus. Lazarus was the only person ever named in a parable that Jesus used. He was diseased, left only to be a beggar as his only means of survival. He was sick. He was hungry. He was abandoned. And he laid at the rich man's door, longing for the scraps or anything as a way to live. The reality is this: Lazarus was a faithful believer. Now, while he suffered and God allowed the suffering to continue, when he died, where did he go? He had a miserable life. But when he died, he went to heaven, where he would have everlasting joy, everlasting happiness, everlasting blessings. His final reward was all because Lazarus spent his life pursuing heaven. He spent his life pursuing God. Lazarus was not enjoying his pain and suffering, but he would endure it for just a period of time because he knew it wouldn't last. Where did he end up? With God. Feasting in heaven with Abraham. He was not suffering, but he was in the arms of his Creator. Even though his life was tormented and miserable here on this earth, he would go on to great joy and happiness in the next. About 20 years ago, my grandmother, who was such an inspiration to my life, she had a care home and took care of about 4 or 5 ladies at a time, elderly ladies, and took care of them and loved every minute of it. She was a preacher's wife, so was very good at taking care of the congregation. My grandfather, she had a big family, 6 kids and all kinds of grandkids, and just nurtured and took care of each and every one of us. She was such a busy person, such an active person with family and church and her job, that she was just a vibrant person. Well, then cancer hit her. And this person who was so vibrant, who was such a leader in our family, in our household, became a stick figure because she lost so much weight. Her vibrant color became gray. She lost all her hair. And when she was so active and required little sleep, she would sleep most of the day and just have a few moments where she was awake. She was in so much pain that she couldn't stand it. And to see that happen before our very eyes was devastating. Now, many of you can relate because you've experienced it with a loved one. As step by step, they progressively get worse and worse and worse and continue to suffer. But because of my grandma's choices, and because she pursued God in her life and invested in that, when she finally passed, I remember thinking, she's gone to a better place. No more oxygen tanks, no more masks, no more pain. She could go on to see the family that had gone on before her. I just knew there was a comfort there when she passed. And as we were coping over the loss, we knew that she was at peace. We knew that she was no longer in pain. And that's the promise of a believer. That's why when someone close to us dies, we have hope. We have joy. Because they believed. And it was only for the time that they spent investing in God, investing in something that would last. Any investment that you make, you have to weigh out the risk and return. The risk and, what is the risk here? versus what am I going to get in return? In Luke 16:27 through 31, we'll see the difference here. Both Lazarus and the rich man took a great risk, but only one of them had a great return. Verse 27 says this, Father, he said, the rich man speaking, then I beg you to send to my father's house, because I have 5 brothers, to warn them so they won't come to this place of torment. But Abraham said, they have Moses and the prophets, they should listen to them. No, Father Abraham, he said, but if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent. But he told them, if they don't listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be persuaded if someone rises from the dead. That's a very powerful statement. We're going back to that here in a moment. The rich man had a great risk. If he would invest in what he wanted to invest in, he would get some reward, some return. So he chooses to invest in his wealth and in himself for the rest of his life here on earth. Because of that, he received a return in finances. He became very wealthy, very prosperous. But what good does that do in the end? You can't take it with you. He would pass on, leaving everything behind. Now, because he made that choice, because of that, he neglected other things. He neglected a relationship with God. He didn't spend time worshiping. He didn't spend time growing spiritually. He was too busy enjoying his wealth and living high. He had an opportunity to believe and pursue God, but ultimately he would fail. His family, on the other hand, he never spent time investing in them. He doesn't talk about his kids. He doesn't talk about his spouse. He only talks about his brothers. And never investing in them spiritually either, he's concerned for them. But Abraham makes this fascinating statement when he says, they're not going to believe a man raising from the dead if they don't believe Moses and the prophets. He's saying they don't believe in God's word. What makes you think they're going to believe in someone who rose from the dead? And we take a step back and think, man, I would listen to somebody who was once dead and I knew now was alive. But wouldn't we? Think about in their day, think about the Pharisees, think about the Roman Empire. When it was discovered that Christ's tomb was empty, what good did that do them? Did they believe because Christ's tomb was empty, the Pharisees and the Romans? No. Instead, they started spreading rumors. They tried to cover it up. They wouldn't believe. So I think it stands to reason that Abraham has a tremendous point. That if all these years that God had developed the Old Testament and how everything came true when Christ came, what made them think that they would believe someone from the dead if they didn't believe Christ himself? It's a fascinating statement. So he didn't invest in God, he didn't invest in his family, he wouldn't invest in his friends either. You know, he never grew closer to God, he was never encouraged. We're humans. And because of that, we're stubborn. We refuse to listen to anyone. Even if they make a good point, we refuse to listen. This is what happened to the rich man. He wanted to pursue only himself. So his risk on earth was, I'm going to invest in the wealth and finances, and he had somewhat of a return. Now, with that in mind, he had another risk. He risked the fact that God didn't exist. Now, coming from a non-believer, someone who doesn't believe, they feel that God doesn't exist. This rich man felt God didn't exist, so he wasn't concerned with God. He took a risk. Because let's just take a moment to see it from his perspective. He lived his entire life believing that God didn't exist. He lived his entire life thinking, I don't have to worry about anything past this earth. You only live once, I'm going to enjoy it. But he took a huge risk. Because in the end, God does exist. And in the end, God was real. And God is real. Was it worth the risk to have however many years he lived on this earth versus an eternity of hell and torment? firmly believe if they asked him now, was it worth the risk? It's a no-brainer. It wasn't worth it. Because even though he had a period of time in this life where he enjoyed wealth and luxury, he would now be in eternal damnation, hell, pain, suffering that would never end. All the good in life that we have and we call them blessings, he would never have again. Was it worth the risk? And on the other side, Lazarus also took a risk. And he had a tremendous payoff. To live a life of misery. So many people, they want their happiness. We want our happiness. This is our life. I'm entitled to some form of happiness. But Lazarus did not have that thought. He knew his life would be miserable. He knew it would be awful. But he knew it would end. And he knew that he would go to heaven for pleasure, joy, happiness, luxury living. But he would just have to sacrifice his life here on this earth. This is a trade that's offered to all of us. Lazarus chose to invest in the right things. He didn't have any money, but he had God. He was homeless, but now you would have a forever home. What would be your answer? What is our answer? We have the same opportunity. We live in a great time in a great nation where we don't have to live like Lazarus. But if we choose to follow God and be faithful to Him, we will have heaven. If we receive this happy medium because we don't have to live like Lazarus. We have an opportunity to have some comfort in life, to have some happiness in life. But we also have the opportunity to turn our life over to God. And what are you willing to trade off? Are you willing to trade off this life for an eternity in heaven with God? It's all about investing. There's going to be stuff, there's going to be junk that you're going to have to put up with in this life. In this year, 2016, you're going to have bad days. You're going to go through a period of a tough time. I'm not a prophet, but I know it's going to happen. But start the investment now. Whatever you're going through in this life, start investing spiritually now. What can God do in your life spiritually in 2016? How can you grow closer to Him in 2016? What kind of impact can you have on your family, on your friends, on anyone you have an influence with in 2016? What kind of opportunities will you have to lead people to Christ? But it's never going to happen if we don't start investing now. January 3rd, Fresh Start Sunday, is an opportunity for us to invest today, starting today, in things spiritual. Because you can invest in money, you can invest in family and friends, and the list goes on and on of all the things that you can invest in. And I'm here to tell you, they're not going to last. But if you truly love your friends and family, if you truly love those you spend your life with, then you will invest spiritually so that you can lead and guide them spiritually. What's God going to do for you? What's God going to do for our church in 2016? This is called hope. By starting the investment today. Invest in yourself spiritually. You're going to have a dynamic impact on your family. You're going to have a dynamic impact on those you love. You're going to have a dynamic impact for our church. Only if we pursue God in our relationship with Him and allow ourselves to grow and have an influence on those around us. As the musicians come forward, Charles Perrault says, the love of family and admiration of friends is much more important than wealth and privilege. Money can buy you a lot of things. Money can provide a lot of things for you. Friends and power, they can provide things for you. But it's only going to last for a moment. Well, you can leave your kids. If you can leave your friends, what you can leave your family members, that will last for eternity, is to love them enough to share the love of Christ with them. That's not going to go away. And it will be worth it. In the end, you can't take the riches with you. In the end, it doesn't matter what you did as an occupation. In the end, it doesn't matter how many friends you had. It doesn't matter what kind of family you had. In the end, it matters with what you do with what God gave you. What kind of impact, what kind of influence were you able to have? Beautiful thing about starting a year off today is we can start pursuing and investing in our spiritual walk for not only ourselves, not only for our church, but for those that we love and care for. We have decisions to make. Maybe your decision today is to accept Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior. This is the first time making that choice. If you're ready to make that choice and give your life to the Lord and be baptized today, then I encourage you to make that, as Will made last week. If you have come here today looking for a church home and you want this to be your church home, we would love to have you. It's a simple thing to do. This is part of your decision today. If you just need encouragement, I would love to help you with your investing spiritually today by praying with you. I offer that to you. Consider it and think about it as we enter to the final moments of worship. Let's stand as we sing.
Holy presence. Jesus, draw me